She started her journalistic career at Hindustan Times, New Delhi, at a time when there were very few women in journalism. She has also worked with and written for Indian Express, India Today, Sunday, Filmfare, Femina, Illustrated Weekly, and Sunday Midday. Her first book, Voices in My Blood, was published in 1990. Her second book, Disappearing Daughters, The Tragedy of Female Infanticide, was published in 2007 and became an instant bestseller. The Healing is her first novel. Her upcoming novel, Color of Gold, which is set in a gold mining town, will be out in November this year. Our moderator, Ms. Vasanthi Hariprakash, is an independent journalist, television and radio personality, besides being a documentary filmmaker and media trainer. Ms. Hariprakash was a special correspondent with NDTV reporting on Karnataka. She has anchored documentaries for BBC World News from Nepal and Laos, and the current documentary she is working on will be a part of the series Our Girls, Our Pride on NDTV 24/7. Before we get on with the discussion, we are delighted to launch Kishwar Desai's The Sea of Innocence. The novel deals with the increasing sexual violence taking place in India. During a beautiful holiday to Goa, where hippies and backpackers while away their hours, protagonist Simran Singh, a social worker and crime investigator, discovers the dark underbelly of the idyllic location where a young British girl goes missing. Saving the British teenager Lisa Kay evolves into the rest of the narrative. I now request all the dignitaries to kindly launch the book, The Sea of Innocence. I now request the dignitaries to proceed with the session. Thank you.
Yeah, the mic handing over ceremony first. I think that's the moderator's first job. Namaskara and welcome to all of you. I can tell you that today I have a problem of plenty. I have a panel here with such a rich and diverse body of work across issues, across fields, and I'm going to be very tempted to ask more and more. But of course, the audience Q&A is such an important segment here. So please keep your questions ready. I'm going to tell you how and where we get there. Now, the topic of today, while I welcome all the panelists, Gita, Kishwar Desai, Shobhaa, this is too much of an alliteration. Gender endangered. Now, those of you who are trying to really roll it around, it basically is an open-ended topic in one sense. So it just gives us that much more scope to explore very, very critical issues. But let me kind of set the tone for today's discussion. And then, of course, we will quickly start with questions for each one of our panelists. Now, yesterday's paper, for instance, on the same day, I made this observation, The Hindu, which said, North or South, rich or poor, the girl child is not safe. And it went on to say, in its very first paragraph, 74,000 more girls under the age of 5 than boys died in India. No biological explanation, because traditionally as a gender, girls are supposed to be stronger. So why is this happening? That was the question that the article set out to answer as well. In the Times of India, another sheet, one saw a woman in Italy protesting against what she said on behalf of her countrywomen was gender violence. There was an Italian NGO which said that 124 women killed by men because of their gender. That's something that the NGO claimed. Now here we are talking about across geographies, across rich and poor states. So really there are no stereotypes. On that note, Shobhaa, what is it that has changed in your quarter century of observation? Why are we as a country, as a civilization, erupting or reacting the way we are? Because do you think that the incidents that are happening today, however gruesome, were happening even, let's say, a decade or so back, except that they were not observed or perceived?
Good evening, Bangalore. Thank you so much for welcoming all of us to this marvelous festival. I was here last year. It was a great, great, great pleasure. Happy to be back. To answer your question, we live in a patriarchal society. That's a given. We all know that. We live with enormous prejudice. We also know that. We live in a society that worships the birth of a male child. We live in a society where the birth of a girl child is frequently mourned, if she's allowed to be born at all. So the girl child is not safe even inside her mother's womb. That is the reality. What we are seeing today, there are several aspects to why we are responding the way we are, and what has led to this escalation, and escalation it most certainly is. The sociological, perhaps, explanation would be that today the rapes that we are seeing are not sexual, really. In rape is an act of aggression, we know. It's a violent act, we know. But the horrific nature of the rapes that we are talking about today goes well beyond sexuality and sex. It is a form of domination. It is a form of repressed rage. It is a form of a sadistic act to, in a way, punish women or show them their place. Otherwise, we wouldn't be using rods and sticks. We wouldn't be attacking a 3-year-old girl. When we talk about a society that's responding to the way women dress and are therefore more provocative, and if they didn't wear mini skirts, perhaps the rape statistic would go down, is a load of baloney. The rage is across the board and regardless of age. What has a 3-year-old done to anybody to deserve what is happening to her? There is also another small short thing which I'd like to complete what I'm saying, is that there is a great amount of imbalance right now in urban areas. We are seeing people who are coming into our cities with the great amount of hope for a better life. These are mainly migrant workers, and of course, they have every right to be wherever there is work. The point is, there is no work. So they're coming here with the expectation of a better life. They're frustrated. Most of them are uneducated. They're illiterate. They're away from their homes. They're starving, and they're angry. They also believe that women are taking away jobs which are rightfully theirs, which comes at various strata and various levels. That rage is being translated into an escalation of violence, and there are cultural reasons that go back to the Mahabharata and beyond. So most women would rather be, the society would like a woman to be a Sita because they're more comfortable with a Sita. They certainly are not comfortable with a Draupadi or someone who fights back, asks too many questions, then she deserves to be punished, and often that punishment takes the most horrific form, the most violent and extreme form, which is rape and murder.
Well, repressed rage you spoke about. Now, Kishwar, would you agree with Shobha's assessment? Again, you are somebody who has managed to get serious issues through the format of fiction in your works. Now, when we talk about repressed rage, the repression might be old, but I think the point here being made is that the rage is, kind of manifesting in new forms. Now, would you agree with Shobha's assessment? What has changed now across the globe? I mean, we are not talking only about India, but what is changing that people are becoming so much more vocal about this violence? People, are they acknowledging it more?
I also want to thank you, and I want to thank Bangalore for having this wonderful festival, and particularly for my book launch, which I'm really grateful for today, that I've been able to do that in Bangalore, and for the fact that we are sitting here and discussing gender, which for me is extremely important. It was an issue which I think for many years had fallen off the map. And
did you get told that when you were writing on gender issues some years back?
Yes, definitely. I think people thought that I was being very boring. I mean, here she goes again, that kind of thing. I mean, why does she want to talk about women's rights and women's issues and and that sort of a thing? Nobody really wanted. My first book was about female feticide and infanticide, which I'd written about. It was published in 2009, and at that time I did face a lot of denial. People were not willing to talk about issues of gender. They were not even able to relate to the fact that actually female feticide and infanticide is the first form of violence that a girl faces within her own family. And it is murder often that goes unpunished, especially if it's infanticide.
So to interrupt you here, so why is the spotlight now on gender?
I think...
Is the media reporting more?
Well, I want to say a couple of things here. Yes, there is much more media awareness, and there is a sort of sense of anger even amongst women and young girls. I want to say that, there are certain issues which have come up over the years, over and over again, which have been reported in the media, and also want to slightly disagree with Shobhaa about the violence which is taking against women, which has been happening against women for, I would say, not just recently, but over centuries. Because if you remember, we do have a caste system which has existed in this country for centuries, and there has been systematic rapes which have been taken place in villages, in cities, which have been of the upper castes, against the lower castes. And there have been a lot of violence against Dalit women, which we have all known about. And in fact, books have been written about it. And there was even a Bandit Queen, which was a film that Shekhar Kapoor had made many years ago. So I wouldn't say that it has gone completely unnoticed or unreported. But what has certainly happened in the recent decades is that this generation, thankfully, will not take it as quietly and let it go unnoticed. And it has come coupled with the rise of social media, which I think had a very important role to play in the whole Nirbhaya case. Because had it not given it a platform for discussion and for even women sitting at home to be able to get angry and to be able to participate in this online discussion which went on, that should this even be happening to a young girl in today's day and age? And this, let us add to it, is an aspirational young girl. So a lot of us were able to, a lot of the rising middle class in India, we were able to connect to this story, because young girls no longer would just want to stay at home and bring up babies and get married. They might want to do it, but they may have other ambition and more aspiration. So I think the whole issue of it coming out into the open is all connected. And I have to say that when I wrote this new book, The Sea of Innocence, which was actually written last year, I had no idea that this was going to erupt in such a volcanic kind of anger, that this whole issue of rape would become something that we all wanted to discuss. But certainly it was there. It was to be noticed by those people who wanted to know about it. But thankfully, today we are all sitting here talking about it.
Well, we are talking about it, and one is not talking only about rapes, but just to open out the endangered bit. It could be from unchecked sex selection to domestic violence to rights of a woman to be recognized. Now, Gita, Aravamudan, your book, Disappearing Daughters, I remember in 2007, was talking about issues that have now come to the fore. I mean, like, for instance, this recent episode of the Haryana, the episode where one girl from Bengal, I think if I'm not mistaken, a couple of friends can correct me if I'm wrong, was brought to Haryana, which is one of the worst sex ratios in the country. And then you have a situation where she is made to sleep with not just her husband, but 4 other women, and it's a gory, 4 other men, and a gory case of sexual abuse. And a colleague of ours from the media network, when she spoke to the police, there was shocking apathy, which shouldn't shock us. Actually, I don't know why it still shocks us, but the guy said that, it's something that happens. It just happens. But you were talking about it in 2007. Did that depress you? And a corollary question is that you went on to write a a note of hope like Women Unbound, where you celebrated women across new careers. So what was this internal journey as a woman writing about the changing woman of the country?
Okay. First of all, I'd like to say, as a Bangalore woman, I'm really, really happy to be here talking to a Bangalore audience. I went to college here, and my very first job was with Indian Express in Bangalore. And allow me a little bit of digression, because, when I joined Indian Express, there was actually no women reporters in Bangalore. And it was quite a battle to get into Indian Express, because no newspaper wanted to hire women, especially in reporting. And they said, editing is a woman's job. Why don't you go into advertising? It's much safer. Can you cover riots and war, as if there was riots and war happening every day on the street? So it was like a real battle to get in. When I joined Indian Express, which was in the same building where it is now on Queen's Road, there was not a single woman in the whole 4-story building, not even a sweeper. There was no women's loo. There was nothing. So anyway, I got in, thanks to a lot of colleagues who later became my colleagues, who thought that, okay, this brash young woman can actually, wants to do something. But having got in, the battle was not won, because I was a woman reporter. And what did women reporters do? They covered flower shows, beauty contests, These were the things, Ikebana exhibition, Rotaract, Inner Wheel Club. I was quite convinced that's all I could do as a woman reporter. So luckily, Mr. V.N. Subrao, which many people might know here, he was my chief reporter, and he said, okay, you want to do crime, I'll send you to the police press conference. You want to do something? So, slowly I got a little bit of more exposure. But I still didn't think that as a woman, I could give voice to other women. It still didn't occur to me. The first break in my head came when I moved to Trivandrum, because I got married. Like all the newspaper editors said, you'll get married, you'll leave this job, you'll go away. So I did that. Went to Trivandrum, and I was commissioned to write a book on nurses and nuns of Kerala. Now, writing this book was a real eye-opener, because first of all, I realized that neither the nurse or a nun would talk to me if I had been a man. I was able to go into the convents, I was able to go and talk to the nurses. They told me all about, how the nurses told me that they went and worked in very remote places only to collect dowries so that they could get married to people, married to somebody who's slightly better off. So the dowry system, which I thought didn't exist in Kerala, did exist. So there was a lot of things that I learned. And that helped me, because after that I became a freelance journalist. And as a freelance journalist, I had a lot of option to put my gender agenda into every story that I wrote. So if I wrote about the Gulf boom from Varkala, I would write about the women who were left behind. So it went on like this. So covering rape or covering harassment, dowry harassment, violence against women was not new to me. I knew that it was happening, and I had met quite a few people. My soul was already kind of hardened with all this. Then in 1994, I went to Uslampatti in Tamil Nadu, and that is where I first met gender violence of this type, where mothers were killing their own daughters. So this time I spent about 2-3 weeks over there, and again, it was only because I was a woman that I was able to talk to them. Even the midwife told me how she killed girl babies after they were born. And when I asked why, she said, I've kept all my own daughters, but if they don't want their daughters and they're willing to pay me, I'm willing to kill them. So I thought this was the ultimate form of violence, that a mother can kill her own daughter. Then came one more moment of enlightenment. I'm sorry, I was very dumb, and I think enlightenment came in patches to me. There was one woman, totally illiterate in one of the villages, who told me, you come from a big city, and you say that it's wrong for us to kill our daughters. What about that scan? What about the rich women who go and kill their babies with find out through a scan that it's a girl, and then they kill their babies? What do you think about that? So that set me off on a new journey, looking at sex-selective abortion. So on the one hand, while I was looking at this, at that time, Penguin commissioned me to write this book, Disappearing Daughters. And so the journey took me from the hamlets of Tamil Nadu to right up to Haryana, Punjab, Delhi, Gujarat, various places across the country. Like Vasanthi said, in Haryana, even in, my book came out in 2007. So maybe it was in 2005 that I encountered this bride in Haryana who had been, it was in Punjab, in Chandigarh, who had been purchased from one of the tribal pockets of Bastar, and she'd been brought there. And she actually had been made to sleep with all the 5 brothers in the house for 2 reasons. One, Punjab had already reached an abysmally low sex ratio. The men of marriageable age could not get girls, and so they went and purchased a girl from Bastar, but they could not afford to buy 5 girls for 5 brothers, so they used the same girl.
They called it the Draupadi Syndrome?
Yeah, they called it the Draupadi Syndrome. And some of them explained it away, telling me that there was a tradition in Punjab where brothers did share a wife. So, this was kind of very difficult for me. I didn't know how to talk to the girl also because she came from a tribal area. But she did manage to convey to me that she was forced to sleep with all the brothers, and she didn't know which child belonged to whom. And to top it all, she was also made to abort the girl children. So not only, it was like a violence upon violence. Then I went to Gujarat, same story. There also I met. And these women don't think that because they were purchased and that their status in the family was better. It was much worse. They were sex slaves.
Gita, so we are basically talking about tradition, legitimizing the social ill, and like you said, violence upon violence. Yeah. In this next round of questions that I have for each one of you, I'm going to look at myth busting. Each one of us, especially in the urban middle class, carries these notions that it all happens somewhere else.
Yeah.
Now, with Shobhaa, I want to ask you the other gender, which is, you are somebody who has given tips on surviving men to knowing the truth about marriage. But your gender column in the week, which I think is going to be about 2 decades in running and more, I want to know, what are the men telling you? Because I see the modern man as having his own set of complexities to deal with. He's grown up with a certain notion of how the woman in his life has been, and the woman who enters his life and his workplace is nothing like what he had imagined. What are the men telling you?
I'm beginning to feel rather sorry for today's men. They are confused. They need our support. I'm reaching out to them. They need our guidance. They need our understanding. They need us to make them better men. They need us to tell them how it actually works in real life. When I wrote Surviving Men, that was a long time ago, maybe 15 years ago, and the book launch, in fact, of that rather provocative book was in Bangalore. And I'll never forget that book launch because it made a lot of young men extremely angry. So angry, in fact, that they staged a walkout. And while they were walking out, they also decided to bash up a few waiters. And there was a lot of hostility. I encountered a lot of hostility with a lot of my books, but particularly Surviving Men, because perhaps it was telling us a few home truths about ourselves in a way that was not necessary. It wasn't about male bashing at all, because I don't believe that is the answer. And if you call yourself a feminist, you must say, I hate men. I certainly don't. I love the man I'm married to. I've loved other men before.
And you love the RBI governor as well?
And the RBI governor, who I have not met, but he sounds like quite a dishy chap. I love my sons. There are wonderful men and there are wonderful women. So it becomes a bit childish, the argument, when you talk about men versus women. It should be men and women together, leading lives which are more equal. Today, we are living in a state of emergency for women. That is something we cannot brush aside. We cannot pretend it's not happening. And it is the urban phenomenon that you talked about. Rape has happened in the countryside for eons. It continues. Even the day of the Nirbhaya judgment, that very day, there were rapes happening across India, reported and not reported. We are talking only about cold statistics that is like a wake-up call for all of us. But what about the unreported rapes? Why did Nirbhaya get the kind of not just coverage in India, but across the world? Because, as Kishwar rightly said, she was an aspirational urban young girl trying to make something of her life. Had she not been that, had the Shakti Mills photojournalist not been symbolic of that urban young woman trying to make something of her life, it would have been unreported as well. And their daughters, and their neighbors, and their colleagues. It was not just any person. And it's a pity because there is class involved. Definitely. Let's not even fool ourselves about that. There is class involved. Had she not been representative of an ambitious middle class, we would not have been in the kind of numbers, they would not have seen those kind of numbers.
But again, coming back to the question, when men write to you, as I'm sure they do, when you write your columns, what are they telling you? What is the truth that you have shown that hurts them the most?
I have also received the most wonderful response from men. So it's not fair to say they all come up, if they write, if they have the anatomical details to write at all, to me, which I shall not be crude and say, it's a four-letter word. A lot of the time, it's a questioning response that actually very positive, that what are we doing wrong? What are we not reading? What is it that we need to see, learn, and understand? And why do women rage against us so much? That's why I said I feel sorry for them. They're very confused. Then there are the guys who come up and who often, when I'm with my husband, and they are quite angry with something they've read, and they come up and say to him in a firm voice, "Excuse me, I want to talk to your missus." And when they talk to the missus, it's sometimes saying, "Madam, it is not fair what you're writing. It is not fair. I'm not that kind of a man." So it's always men who come and talk to me who are saying, it's the other guys who are doing all of this. It's the other guys who are not nice to their wives or to their daughters. I am the exception. So often when I'm reading from my books, I always say every single man in this room and in this audience is an exception. He's an evolved and wonderful chap. It's all the other chaps who need to be reading the books, and it's also, in a way, I let them off because it's not fair. It's not fair to attack this one man who's at least had the courage and even not just the temerity, but he's had the himmat to come and say, I don't agree with you. Most men would just not say it and, probably have little, those voodoo dolls, and they'll probably poke pins into that and say, let's fix this woman when we can. They try to, on panel discussions in particular. I'm often the only woman. But that's okay too. I mean, today what we're seeing against women is something any woman who has a voice, and it's obligatory that we speak up. Because there are thousands and millions who don't have that access, don't have that platform, don't have that voice. And if we keep quiet, we are guilty. So those of us who can do it, we must do it in whichever form we choose to. Through movies, through poetry, through books, through television discussions, whichever platform. There's no platform still large enough, big enough. The crisis is much bigger than all of this, and we must recognize that. It was supposed to be the century of women. Well, we are 13 years into that century. We are waiting. But women are patient. We are willing to wait even longer. So that's fine.
We are, in fact, I'm going to wait for the misters in the audience to respond to that and probably have it straight from the horse's mouth. But myth number 2, that question for you, Kishwar. Now, you live in London and across 3 cities. One of the perceptions that we Indians seem to have is that either here or in third world countries, these things happen, and they don't happen in the so-called advanced West. But then there's this WHO report which says that even in European countries like Germany, there's a slight preference for boys over girls as a firstborn child. Then there is this issue of the British ban on selection of children born through IVF. So how ethical is it? And then this whole debate about the woman president, whether United States will ever have one. What is the West that you see? And is it any different at all at the end of the day from the world that we live in?
The fact of the matter is that men and women are the same the whole world over. But the only thing is that I will say in defense of the society that I now live in abroad, especially in London, is that I do find that the women there are much more militant, they're much more aggressive, they refuse to take any kind of discrimination without raising their voices. And I think that has made the men more conscious of the fact that they simply cannot push them around or they cannot expect them to wait upon them anymore. Except, I will also add the fact that every now and then the tabloids will run a story which compares, whether women should work or whether they should stay at home. So, the biases that we've all grown up with are the same, whether it is a bias here or it is a bias abroad. When I was going around with my first book, when I was doing the book tour in London, and I was invited outside of London to a small village which had a book club. And it was very astonishing, because in that very evolved society, I thought that I was talking to people who really had understood that there was no question of a bias or a discrimination. But in that audience was a woman who'd had 3 baby girls. And she told me she was white, she was British, and she was young. And she told me that she still felt a sense of discrimination within her family, that she should have a son. So, there are certain things that you cannot do away with. The statistics that you quoted from the WHO report, which actually I had also quoted in an article which I had written. And it is surprising that, the male preference is possibly something which is more universal than we imagine. But in India, it is much more obvious. It's absolutely all right for you to ask your doctor that, can you please, ensure I have a baby boy instead of a baby girl every time. And I think that is something that we all need to look out for. Now, I don't see that the same militancy exists in the Indian women. What I want to see in the Indian women is that anger, because, the anger that we've all felt during the Nirbhaya case, I think we need to hang on to that. Because if you are not willing to push back, society will keep pushing you into a corner. And that is what we all have to learn from the women abroad. The women's lib movement abroad was extremely militant. They actually went out there, they planted bombs, they did all kinds of things in order to get their rights. I'm not saying we do all of that, but we certainly need to do much more in this country. And let's not be complacent that we won the battle and the argument is over and now we can all rest happy. No, we have to fight every inch of the way.
Well, the more things change, like they say, the more they remain the same. So in terms of these, inherent biases and prejudices, the myth number 3 that I'm quickly coming to you, Gita, before we answer, open out the audience Q&A session, I'm told 3 questions only. So please keep that ready and, to a specific panelist. But very quickly, Gita, the thing about urban women, rich women versus rural. Now, in the drawing rooms of the urban middle class, a thing like sex selection how does it play out differently? I mean, is the urban women in any sense more empowered than her rural counterpart at all?
What I feel, Vasanthi, is that there are empowered rural women and there are empowered urban women as well. But definitely urban women have a certain extra bit of freedom to make certain choices. And unfortunately, what has happened in our country is the choice they make is not to have girls and to continue to have boys. So unfortunately, what I found while writing Disappearing Daughters was that the worst sex ratios are among the urban, educated, middle class and upper middle class people, say in South Delhi or in Gujarat or in Punjab, where, the literacy levels are very high. People are very well off, and yet this is where the sex selection takes place in a massive way. Why? Because they can afford to get themselves scanned
in a more sophisticated manner.
Illegal abortion done. So this is what is happening. So as a result of this, because I felt very depressed after writing Disappearing Daughters, I wrote one more book, which was called Unbound, Indian Women at Work, where I tried to see how professional, middle-class, educated, working women conducted their lives, faced the issues that they had to face in their works and in their professions, and whether it empowered them to take that decision to say, no, I will not abort my daughters. Why are women doing it? Because they themselves have a certain intrinsic weakness in themselves. They are not very confident that theirs is the life they want to give to another life.
Right.
That is the reason why. So I wrote this other book, which is also done very well. But I cannot say that it had an impact on society. The sex ratios, if anything, have gone down over the past 5 years. Bangalore is one of the worst.
Well, the one thing that you can say about gender, the exact opposite also turns out to be true. So empowerment is as much a reality as much as the endangered part of it. At this round, I'm going to be asking the audience I'm kind of opening this out. So who will the first question come from?
Thanks. It's great to see 4 extremely empowering women on stage. It's even nicer to see the audience walk back after a large portion walked away. For the last 1 year, I have been running something called the Society of Dented Painted Ladies of India. And
Did you say dented painted ladies?
That's right.
Yeah.
You know where that came from. Okay, so my question to the panel, and I'll be great.
Please, one panelist, because we're really running short of time. We don't want to eat into the other one. Which panelist? And quick question.
Fair enough. Specifically to Shobhaa ji, I always hear this when I speak about painted ladies of India, that it's all very well for privileged women to make a song and dance about women's rights. In fact, I once went to a party when someone turned to me and said, "Aajkal to women's rights ka bahut fashion hai." So my question is, how do you... Wendell, stop laughing. So how do you surmount this bias? You've been at the forefront of this. How do you say that, look, my struggle is not about these bunch of women. It's for every woman.
You must ignore such foolish questions to start with. It has no relevance and no place. Each one of us, we do what we have to do. We do it with sincerity of purpose. We do it with honesty and integrity. That is more important. That we are in a position to do it. Don't hold that position against that person. It's like saying, would you agree that whether it was Mahatma Gandhi or Nehru, were they underprivileged rural people, or were they privileged, educated people who used that position to give us our freedom? So what are we talking about? And to talk about these issues being a fashion, I'm telling you, it's not worth a response at all. You don't even dignify it with a response. And there are thousands and thousands of women who I encounter, I'm sure all of us do, I'm sure you do, who come and say thank you, because they wouldn't even have that opportunity. They're not the ones who are being asked their opinion on anything. They're not treated as equals in their own home, forget about in society or within their community at large. So if we are indeed privileged, let's be thankful for that. Let's show some humility that we are in that position to give back something, to articulate what thousands do not have the chance to do. So please, in future, if they ever ask you that, just ignore the question or put them in their place. Put them in their place. And say you're happy to be painted, dainted, and worse. So.
Gita, this is for you. What do you have to say about the responsibility of grassroots level women who keep calling their sons Mera Beta, Mera Raja, and, taking this preferential side of the male child over the lady child?
Wendell, I think it's not just the grassroots women, it's also the middle class women who call their sons Mera Beta, Mera Raja, and they would definitely give a lot of preference to them. My brother, who's a pediatrician, he says it's not just at pre-selection at birth, but even after the children are born, up to the 5 or 6 years old, up to the time they're 5 or 6 years old, if a son falls sick, they'll give him the best treatment. If a daughter falls sick, she'll be neglected and she can die. That also adds to our falling sex ratio. So one thing I would say, to add on to what Shobhaa said is, it's the middle class which sets the fashion. It's the middle class which sets the norms. So if the middle class takes a very strong stand and says, no, girls and boys are equally important, it'll trickle down. It has a trickle-down effect. Finally, it is, whatever it is, the middle class is looked at as something aspirational. If you're super rich, nobody can reach that level. But the middle class can definitely set a very important example. So what I do is I like to talk to college students and school students and tell them that it's very, very important for you to consider boys and girls as equal. I want you to learn this from this today. So I think that is where we have to, the middle class is the most important class right now, I feel, in our society.
I agree. Wendell, just to finish the comment that you made about Mera Raja, Mera Ladla and all that. Even to this day, across the board, if something goes wrong within a family, if the son succeeds spectacularly, a little boy succeeds at school or wins a race or does very well in dramatics, the father is likely to boast in front of his entire family and friends, after all, beta kiska hai? If the girl flunks, is unwell, or even the son flunks, he'll say, maa kidhar thi? It becomes a woman's fault for her children's failures, particularly the son's failures. But it's always, always the father's victory if the son in particular does well. He'll take all the credit. The mother could have slaved her entire life, even gone without meals to make sure that the family is fed. But the father will give himself credit and say, "Beta kiska hai?" It's so culturally ingrained in our family. It's so culturally ingrained in the system in which we live. To break through that, I don't know. People say change the mindset. A mindset change takes 3 generations, maybe 50 years or more. Can we afford it? I'm saying we can't. It is an alarming situation. Can we afford to wait 50 years for change? No, we can't.
Time for one last question, looks like. And I don't know if...
I've already got the mic. I've already got the mic, so I think, this is to all the panelists.
No, one, please. We really do not want to encroach on the other panel's time.
Anyone can answer this question. Any one of the panelists. Firstly, we are all good human beings. I agreed that this is a real issue. But why don't you see it as a human rights issue? It's become a gender bashing issue, number one. Number two, don't you think women need to change their mindset as much as men need to change their mindset?
Okay, I'll take the first part, the second part first. The fact that women need to change their mindset, I think all of us live within a social milieu. Women are not making this particular environment all by themselves. As Shobhaa remarked right at the beginning, especially this country is a highly patriarchal society and has been for thousands of years. It is not a recent phenomena. So the mindset that has to be changed, yes, it has to be both men and women. Women definitely have to stand up and fight for their rights, but men have to become less patriarchal, more aware of the fact that it has to be an equal society. And that's the way they have to bring up the next generation. That's the way they have to behave as well. And if they don't do that, then there have to be enough laws in place which punish this kind of behavior, which ensure that people who step out of line, whether it is for sexual harassment or any kind of sexual problem which they might create for a woman, they definitely get punished for it. And I would say that therefore the mindset has to be changed not only for women but for men equally. As far as it being a human rights problem, of course it is. Women are human. Have you forgotten? So who would question that? But the point obviously is that when we are fighting for justice, you have to give it a name. You have to create a solidarity around that issue. And this is what we're all trying to do, is that we are trying to specify it by saying it is a particular gender issue that we are talking about and trying to create a sense of awareness about it. Because if we just say human rights, it might just get, diffused somehow, because then a whole lot of other issues, which are also equally important, I agree, but will then come into it. So I think all of us have to agree that, yes, as we all said, it is the middle class. But I want to reiterate one last point, which is an issue you haven't raised, but which was mentioned in passing, is the importance of festivals like this in changing the mindset. It's only when art, literature, popular culture, music begin to reflect this particular sense of change that we all want, begin to reflect the reality and not romanticize it. That is when the real change will begin to come in. And I hope all of you will join us in bringing that change. And I think that is the whole thing which we are all trying to do here today. Thank you.
I think Bhavna, Sumaya, you've been raising your hands for a while now. Maybe we can have the last question, the very last.
I'm born and brought up in Bombay, traveled late nights, worked till late night. But after what happened to Nirbhaya and after what's happened at Shakti Mills in Bombay, there is a fear in the city, there is a fear in every woman, whether she comes from upper class, middle class, lower class. If you're traveling at 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, whatever time, Shobhaa Day, my question is to you. Is it only me that is feeling scared, or do you feel it too?
Bhavna, there are always seminal moments in a society that make you suddenly open your eyes to the grim realities around you. There have been other rapes, there have been more after Shakti Mills as well. But in a way, it galvanized Mumbai's working women like no other case has in the past. And yes, there is fear in the city. And yes, there is panic in the city. For the first time, like yourself, I have worked late nights as a journalist, covered stories, never ever thought about my safety. My mother never had to think about my safety. I would go for training as an athlete at 4:35 in the morning in darkness, walk half a kilometer without having to worry. 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers to go by train, by public transport to school and college, walk across several deserted Maidans at that hour and later in the evenings. My mother never stayed, and it was pre-cell phone days. There was no way we could have communicated to even say I'm safe or I'm not safe. But not for a moment did she have that doubt. Today, my daughters, I have 4 of them, they leave the house and I'm almost paranoid. I'm calling them almost on the half hour. Are you okay? Where are you? What's going on? Come home soon. These are all adult children. But there has been a change. It is like the 93 riots in Mumbai, which changed everything forever. I have a feeling that the Shakti Mills rape case has changed the way Mumbai's women feel about the city and their safety. It's also going to discourage a lot of other women who would come to Mumbai thinking of it as the one city in India which offered them safe passage, which recognized their dreams, their aspirations. That has changed. So let's not even delude ourselves. The city is not safer at all than it was the day that horrific rape took place. So in what way has the administration addressed this crisis, addressed this feeling of panic? They have not so far. It's one thing to say fast-track courts. The fast-track courts happened because the young girl also belonged to our fraternity. Being a media person, the media supported her. Would they have supported any other person? There were other rapes that had taken place in that very premises. The same rapists. No one bothered, no one cared. So there are certain cases which capture the imagination of the middle class, of the city, of the nation, and of the world. I have a feeling Nirbhaya did that as far as the world was concerned. We were tabbed the rape capital of the world, Delhi. We were hanging our heads in shame to live with that. Now with the Shakti Mills thing, it's going to be the same with Mumbai. It's going to discourage a lot of young middle-class girls from coming and attempting to make their careers in a city that was once their hope, their heaven, their salvation. It's such a shame it has happened. Such a shame.
Really shame indeed. I'm really sorry there are more hands going up, but we have to end this discussion. But one thing that I would really like to end this on is about women moving from this endangered position to empowered position will start having to be more vocal for a change. I remember, of course, Shobha's column about the real narrative for women in the 2014 elections. So who is speaking to women? And, all the points that we've made. And we will end on that note of a recent ad, a progressive ad that's really come up. And this woman handing over the tea and says, well, don't ignore us. 49% vote, hamara bhi hai. On that note, thank you so much for being a wonderful audience. It's now time for the next session to take over. Thanks once again.
Thank you very much. You've been a fabulous audience. Thank you, Bangalore.